Okay, good afternoon. Happy Wednesday of Mental Health Month. Today it is just me. I don't have a guest today, but I have some the rest of the week. And if anybody else wants to come on and be a guest, just let me know. After having all those guests for a while, it's kind of strange going back to the just me. And we're back to the jigsaw puzzle, by the way. I had to start a new one because I forgot to save the one I was working on. So I guess a couple of announcements first. Tomorrow we're having back-to-back live streams. I'm going on Trauma Types show again. We're going to do a panel on neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, giftedness, the whole range. And there's going to be, I think, 4 of us. So come with your questions or make little comments in the chat section. And it's also going to be streamed to my channel. We figured out how to do it on StreamYard today. So you can either watch it on Trauma Type on YouTube or you can watch it on my channel. I'm not going to schedule it ahead of time because of the way we have to stream it with StreamYard, but I guess I should tell you the time. It's going to be tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central Time. So at 11 a.m., if you pull up my channel, you should see the live stream started, barring any technical difficulties on Jeff's part, the other Jeff. So, or maybe this Jeff too, you never know. So that's tomorrow. And then after that, at 1 p.m. Central, I'm going to be talking with Eric from Canada about his mental health story and journey. I'm happy I'm doing that because one of my goals for setting up this channel in the first place was I wanted to find a way for people to come and open up about their mental health and watch others do it and kind of destigmatize the whole talking about mental health. So when people are willing to come on here and talk about their personal mental health challenges and journey, that's right in line with what I was hoping the channel would be able to do. So that's tomorrow. And then Thursday we have Sarah. We're going to talk about growing up rural and the mental health, growing up rural and having mental health challenges is. And the reason it's so significant is because of the different type of support, lack of resources, lack of access. So you kind of find creative ways of supporting yourself when you're kind of isolated in the middle of nowhere, in the boonies. So we're both country. We both grew up country. So we're going to talk about that together. So you come and listen to that Thursday. I'll schedule it. It's going to be in the afternoon. And then Friday, I have Emerald coming on to talk about trauma and probably some more on neurodivergence, giftedness, that type of stuff. And then Saturday, I'm very excited. We have another international guest. We have Garlock from Ireland, who's going to talk about men's mental health. Yay. That's my thing. So that's the rest of the week. Okay, I guess that's all the announcements. Let me commence to getting started on this puzzle. Today, I had to find a topic to talk about that I thought could fill an hour. So I started thinking, what's something that I probably really know a lot about that I could talk for an hour on? And then I realized, conflict. I get in enough of it. I have a lot of experience being in conflict, managing conflict. And when I say conflict, I'm not only talking about interpersonal, it could be intrapersonal conflict as well. And the two kind of tie together anyway. And believe it or not, I have professional experience doing conflict resolution. That's kind of, some of that's what we do in the inpatient work and the peer work that I do. But when I was a mental health ombuds for 2.5 years, a lot of what we did was conflict resolution. We mediated between parties, people that were having issues with their mental health services, and then the mental health agencies themselves that were providing the services. And we had to go through conflict resolution training and stuff like that. So I know me some conflict, and I'm going to try to attempt to share with you all the things I can remember about it. I didn't have time to put in anything organized together as usual, so it's just going to be me kind of freestyling it. So, first thing to know about conflict, well, I usually know I'm in conflict or am about to be in conflict or headed toward conflict because I feel it. I feel it in my body. I feel it affectively. And a lot of times it's instantaneous, especially I want to talk about like kind of some of the different types of conflict, especially if you're neurodivergent. A lot of the conflicts I get into are spontaneous, unplanned, unforeseen. A lot of them revolve around communication breakdowns, which is one type of conflict. And intrapersonally, that seems to be the one I'm most involved in. It can happen in person. It can happen online, on Twitter. I'm constantly getting in Twitter fights. I think I'm in the middle of a productive, intelligent, rational conversation where everybody's trying to get their needs met and arrive at the truth. And next thing I know, somebody's freaking out about something I said or did, and the conflict begins. That is what I call a communication breakdown. I don't know what I did to contribute to it or to cause it or what my role in it is. It's whatever communication that I thought was going so smoothly just completely starts to go off the rails and break apart, kind of like a roller coaster going off its tracks. I have learned to handle those in several different ways. Kind of that's true of most conflict in general that I'm in. Just keep in mind that's one type of conflict. I'll get back to what to do with communication breakdowns eventually. Another type, particularly for autistic, perhaps ADHD or neurodivergent people, are the meltdowns. Now that's not so much conflict as that when I reach a processing limit, and my brain is just it's literally like blue screening. Like the computer's just overloaded on its resources and its processing power. My RAM or ROM or whatever just cannot process anymore, and my whole brain and nervous system starts to shut down. That doesn't happen so much with me in conflict because being an extrovert maybe or just being me, conflict usually energizes me and I can keep it going. Once that conflict starts, I'm usually engaged and alert. And so meltdowns for me are more like shopping causes it, or when I have to visually process something for too long, my brain will just shut down after a certain point. But for some autistic people, meltdowns can look like conflict or be mistaken for conflict, especially if it's tantrums. That's really what we're talking about. Yes, meltdowns can sometimes appear as conflict and be mistaken as, but hopefully, especially if it's an adult on the spectrum, they know how to take the time they need to recover from that and manage it. So I won't spend too much time on meltdowns. Tantrums is what I want to talk about. That's the toddler. We're twice exceptional. We're extreme asynchronous development, which sometimes is phrased as many ages at once. Our intellectual development can outpace our social, emotional development. Part of me is still a toddler. Part of me still goes into toddler rages when I don't get what I want, or somebody tells me no, and that is a tantrum. And when a tantrum's happening, I don't always recognize it as a tantrum right away. Usually when I can start to identify that this is a tantrum, I feel embarrassed and a little bit shamed and for acting that way at my age. But I also understand the neurological mechanism behind it, so I'm not too hard on myself over it. So tantrums can come on suddenly, and there's also kind of that feeds into that is what I've talked about before. It's that trait reactance. It's a term in psychology, and I better just pull up the Wikipedia article because they're going to be able to describe it better. In psychology, reactance is an unpleasant motivational reaction to offers, persons, rules, or regulations that threaten or eliminate specific behavioral freedoms. Anytime I feel like somebody's, I call it authoritarianism. Anytime somebody's trying to set themselves up as an authority over me and start to tell me what to do or restrict my freedom, my whole nervous system just instantly flares up. The warrior comes out, and we'll talk about the warrior archetype. The warrior comes out, and that is probably one of the quickest ways to piss me off. And I'm talking about, it doesn't take much. TV commercials that say, come on down, or buy now. And like, don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me where to come on down. Don't tell me what to buy. I can determine that for myself. Anytime I feel like my self-determination is being threatened or someone's trying to hijack it, it can be the intercom at the airport that says, don't walk in this lane, stay on the, like automated instructions from machines, do it to me. I'm so hypersensitive to control. And so a lot of time that can lead to conflict pretty quickly. Doctors' offices, when they try to tell me what, like, I'm a grown adult, and where I come from in South Louisiana, adults kind of respect each other's sovereignty and autonomy. We don't really spend a lot of time trying to tell other adults what to do or how to do things. And so when I'm in a culture that's kind of a little more heavy on that, that trait reactance can come out bad. So and that kind of feeds into the tantrum. Like, usually if there's a tantrum, there's probably some kind of deep-seated immature. I don't want to necessarily say trait reactance is immature, because it's been pretty constant over my life, and there is a rationality behind it. But the tantrums and the more toddler-like reactions definitely, I would say, are immature, meaning underdeveloped emotional responses. And there's some emotional maturity and development that I just did not reach or get somehow that other adults may have, because of the neurodivergence, the intellect outpaced the social emotional, or the autism, or whatever, how I'm wired. But I want to make a comment about emotional maturity. It is very relative, individualized, and situational. Even the most emotionally mature adults, when faced with situations outside of their coping range, can revert to a more underdeveloped, regressive response, like toddler type response. So it's not a constant where somebody has like a certain level of emotional development around all situations or stimuli, and other people like me have maybe gaps in that or deficiencies. Anybody can have an underdeveloped response to some kind of stimuli at some point, if the situation's right, if the individual circumstances are right, if their physiology at the time is right, maybe they haven't eaten or slept. So don't get too judgy about emotional maturity if you have it and think that you're immune from what I'm talking about, because we all start out as toddlers. We were all babies screaming in the cradle. It can happen to anybody. It just happens more often with me, because however y'all developed, however you got your emotional maturity, that didn't happen to me. That process, some of it did, and I learned a lot of it as an adult. Like, I'm much better at it at 52 than I was, say, at 16, or even at like 30. So life experience themselves, those rites of passage, you can grow from that and achieve some emotional development. So anyway, that was all to talk about tantrums and communication breakdowns, tantrums. Now, there is authentic anger or rage when I feel like a value, like a deeply held value, is being violated or crossed, or like a sense of injustice. If somebody comes and to my room and starts to steal my shit or harass me or something, that's going to be authentic rage. I wouldn't say that's a tantrum. I wouldn't say that's a communication breakdown. That is an authentic response to injustice. And gifted people tend to feel like I feel all my emotions very deeply, but gifted people in particular seem to have this sensitivity to injustice and moral violations. I'm not saying other people don't have it. It seems to be distributed very highly in that population. Um, a big one that gets me is I'm very protective of people I care about, and I don't so much care what you say or do to me. If you go after somebody that I love or care about, that's when the fury of hell is gonna come out. I was like that with Mike. Mike was deaf, and he sometimes people would make fun of him. He had the little deaf accent, or he was the nicest guy, really, truly the nicest guy I've ever met or that you ever want to meet. And he didn't, but he drew, just because of his disability, sometimes he drew a lot of, well, not a lot, but sometimes he drew some social persecution, let's say. And that would infuriate me. If people that don't deserve mistreatment from others and get it anyway in front of me, and I know that they didn't do anything to deserve it, that brings out, that's the warrior in me too. That brings out anger and rage, which that's the affect. There's aggression, which is kind of neutral, and it can, like, people, especially today with the whole masculinity thing, people try to stigmatize aggression as negative or an evil, but aggression to me is really kind of neutral. It depends on what you do with it. It's just a natural affect, like fear or sorrow. I was told one time that a person's either generally fear-based, anger-based, or shame-based. I think those were the three. And don't ask me to quote this. Just came up in a discussion somewhere. I didn't look too much into it, but it made sense at the time. I'm definitely anger based or aggression based. I don't feel a lot of fear. I'm not scared of people. They don't bother me. I don't think anybody's better than me, and I'm not better than anybody else. We're all kind of on the same level. So there's nothing to be scared of. I don't intimidate easily at all. And I'm definitely not shame based. I've what little shame I may have had at one point, I've outgrown, or I don't know where it is anymore. But I'm human, and I do things that humans do, and it doesn't really bother me. But I'm definitely aggression or anger based. That's the response that gets set off with me the most, especially after the grief and the PTSD. Like before the grief and the loss, it took a lot to get me angry. But when I got there, you didn't want to be around. I promise. And I'm not saying that threateningly. I'm saying that descriptively. I am not fun to be around when I'm activated, and I try to use it responsibly. But after Mike and after losing him, I was like 3 or 4 times a day, 10, 20 times a week, like just every little thing started like triggering me, and it started reacting to it. And I was constantly getting in fights with people and strangers and restaurant workers, and staff, and people on the bus, just everywhere. So part of that's just the hyperreactance from the PTSD. So I guess I didn't know if you needed a big old anatomy of conflict, but I tried to give you some types of conflict, because people that didn't grow up in maybe higher conflict cultures like I did, and the South, is considered an honor culture. Although maybe not quite so much the part I came from, which is the Cajun part. It's a little different. It's the French part. If you look at the map of the 11 cultures of North America, we're the part that's called New France. It's the little triangle at the bottom of Louisiana. But honor culture, I'll own some of the features of it. And so people that didn't grow up in those higher conflict cultures and are maybe conflict averse or conflict avoidant, or didn't have grow up with like a lot of experience handling conflict, and that's really the best way to learn conflict, is to just get in enough of it so that you learn the patterns and how to manage it after a while, like the nuances and ins and outs of it. So for people that grew up with not a lot of exposure to conflict and it happened from a distance, it can all look like one thing. It could all look like violent, like somebody's violently angry and there's danger, impending danger. But that has not been my experience with conflict. In fact, I think a lot of conflict, especially interpersonal conflict between people you care about, can actually be healthy and transformative. And I use this concept of transformative conflict all the time, where you kind of work through the conflict and come out on the other side. But the relationship kind of has to be strong enough to do that, and the trust has to be built that the two of you do have the capabilities to pull something like that off. And it helps sometimes to have a third party mediator that's skilled at that. And also, people can bond through conflict. Like, I remember growing up, my brothers would fight and wrestle all the time, and they're incredibly close. And me and my stepbrother would wrestle. Like, literally, we'd wrestle. He was into wrestling on TV, and I would. It was, wrestling is so, it's so obviously fake to me, even as a kid. And I would tell him all the time how fake it was. And then he would jump on me and start to wrestle me until I admitted that it was real. And so we wrestled all the time too about wrestling, and we bonded, like we were close. So sometimes conflict, like, animals, puppies, or some mammals roll around and learn, like, bond through aggression and learn how to safely manage their aggression with their in-group. So conflict's not always bad. It's not always something to be scared of. If you have the confidence that you can manage or handle conflict, again, that internal locus of control that I'm so big on, that is going to increase your sense of an internal locus. So how do you handle conflict? And once it starts, well, you kind of have to assess each situation in the moment, and it is situational, it is individual, it is contextual. There's so many different factors that can determine, but basically, know your style, and you're probably going to know your style just from when it happens and tuning into how you feel in the moment. Like, if you're conflict avoiding, your instinct's probably going to be to run or get out of the situation or avoid the conflict in general. Mine is to confront and fight through it and get it over with and resolve it. So you're going to have like an initial instinct kind of that's part of your pattern. Oh, that's nothing I want to say about conflict, especially in relationships, friendships, coworker, like any two people, or sometimes more, but let's start with two for now. That initial your first conflict, that initial conflict that happen in any relation, like no relationship is going to always be a smooth path the whole time. Some kind of conflict's going to crop up at some point, or is likely to. I'm not going to be dogmatic about it and say some relationships never have conflict. Even Mike and I, in the beginning, like the first 6 months or so when we were getting to know each other and get adjusted, we had some conflict, but we had the maturity to work through it as well. After that, we had very little, almost none. But that first conflict and how you handle it, how you recover from it, is going to set the pattern for all the future conflict after that. It's just going to it starts a spiral. And so the next conflict, you can map the pattern out the first time, and you can almost guarantee, again, not going to be axiomatic about it, but you can almost guarantee that that's the pattern you're going to fall into more and more each time conflict happens. That's why I am very alert to new people and when conflict happens with them, because I know that we're setting the pattern for all of the future conflict we're going to have together. So I try to set it in a healthy way from the start. Usually, to me, a healthy way is when two psychologically mature adults can stay with, So the first thing about conflict is it's going to probably generate emotion or affect. You're not in control of the intensity of the affect, the duration of the affect. Neurodivergent, ADHD in particular, with the um, lack or let's say difficulty with emotional regulation because of just the brain and nervous system and how it's structured. Gifted people, those factors might influence how intense it gets. The event itself, like if you caught someone in bed with your spouse, that's going to generate a different reaction in you than if they, took a beer out of the refrigerator. So, like the severity of the violation, all of those factors are going to probably influence how hard that affect hits, but you're not really in control of the affect itself. So once the conflict starts, you're going to experience some kind of affect at some level, let's say. And so the first thing to do is that's your starting point. That's the kind of if it's too overwhelming, I'm pretty good. I have this remarkable ability somehow to sit with an enormous amount of emotion and not act on it. Like I've been told several times, like I'll be sitting in a chair, conflict will start, my emotions will flare up and escalate. One of my supervisors told me once that my forehead turns red, I have a vein that bulges out, and my face gets real angular, and it looks scary to other people. I'm not conscious or in control of any of that. So I hope people are not penalizing me for just the way I look when I'm having an emotion. So I can sit in a chair in the middle of a really high intense emotion and not move and just let the emotion be. So the ability, I guess, to sit with strong emotions is a good first step. And I want to say it can be learned or you can train yourself to do it. I think it comes naturally to me, and I've probably developed it over time as well. But I want to believe everybody has I feel like every adult has the ability to decide what they do with an emotion or affect once it happens. I don't want to believe we're so passively controlled by our lower drives and instincts that we don't have some kind of control or ability to decide to either sit with them, de-escalate them, regulate them somehow. So I'm everything I'm telling you is coming from the stance or the supposition that you have some ability to determine what you do in response to a intense emotional reaction. So I'm capable of sitting with intense anger or any kind of intense emotion really and continue it. My emotion does not impact my reason. I could be furious, angry, raging. I'm not saying it doesn't have an influence, but I can still be rational and engage in rational dialogue at the same time that I'm having this intense emotion. Now, people tell me that's rare. I don't know. It's my norm. And I've been told before where we'll be sitting at a table, a conflict will start, and I've been told I'm acting out. I need to calm down. I need to stop being so aggressive. And all I'm doing is sitting here. Like my body has not done anything different than when the conversation started to when the conflict started. So people read it as an action, like just the intensity of the emotion itself reads as like I'm doing something to them. But I'm very conscious that I'm just sitting in this chair. And the emotion's like an electrical current. It's running through my body. But I'm aware of everything going on. I could dialogue. I can still be reasonable. I can listen to logic. So if that's not you, this is my first stage of conflict. I get as close to that state as I possibly can. So if you're able to be aware that let's just take anger because that's probably the emotion that's going to drive most conflict. If you're aware that you're angry, acknowledge it. It's normal. It's human. Don't try to moralize about it. Accept it. Let it course through you. If you're able to regulate it, If you have techniques or you're able to de-escalate it, fine. But the important thing is to try, like the logical party, the part I call the third factor. The first factor is your biological factors, like the affect itself, the chemical process, the adrenaline, whatever. The second factor is the environmental factors, the person you're angry with, the event that happened maybe, and then the third factor is your awareness of both of the first and second factors, and your ability to self-determine or use your agency to decide how you want to react and respond to the first two factors. And that first factor is going to be the feeling of anger itself. So when I'm feeling angry, I'm aware that I'm angry, and that's when my third factor kicks in, or it's always kind of operative, but that's when I engage my third factor consciously and decide, okay, what do I want to do in this situation about this anger? Now, a lot of it's going to depend on the person, the relationship I have with that person. If it's a stranger at the doctor's office, I might have a different response than if it's a close friend and I don't want the relation, I value the relationship and I don't want to lose the relationship or damage it too badly. So evaluation, I guess, acknowledgement, awareness, and then evaluation. Evaluate the situation, evaluate yourself, evaluate your goals, your needs, evaluate the relationship with the other person, how important it is to you. And usually when there's conflict, it's a conflict of values. There's some value that you may not even be conscious that you hold that's in conflict with whatever is going on around you. And by around you, I almost always mean another person. There's another person who's saying or doing something that's conflicting with this value. And the anger is kind of this alarm system that your value is being threatened or in jeopardy, and that defense kicks in. That's the warrior archetype. There is a healthy warrior archetype. I want to say for all genders, but I know specifically for men, our ability to fight, protect, defend things that are important to us, things that we care about, things that we love. Don't try not to have a negative relationship with your inner warrior. It's there to serve you. It's not there to control you. Don't let it control you, but you can deploy it and use it in situations where that it's suited for, because it does serve a useful purpose. I'm discovering as I do parts work that kind of all the parts of ourselves, even the parts I don't like, even the shadow part, even the negative parts, if I kind of look at them and gain a broader perspective on each one and start to think about their value, like what value could this part have, even though I don't seem to like it right now in the moment, there's almost always something I like about every one of them, or I can see that they're there to serve me or help me in some way. Now, there are parts that do sabotage and are there to sabotage, but in general, I try to have positive relationships to all the aspects of myself as I discover them. So try to develop a good relationship with your warrior. Maybe I'll do a topic one day on just the warrior archetype and how to cultivate a positive warrior side. But for now, know that your warrior is engaged. You're feeling the intense emotion. Now, one thing with conflict is there can be an escalation spiral. So if both the two, I'm going to assume it's two people, that it's a dyad. If it's more than two, that can complicate matters even further, because each person's going to be affected by the conflict and respond in their own individual unique ways. So the dynamic is, there's just more to take into account and more possibilities of the directions the conflict can go in. But for now, let's just assume a dyad of two people. So depending on your skill and the skill of the other person will determine what happens with the conflict. That's why usually, and the more of it I can take control of and master myself and direct myself, the better. I trust myself to handle conflict more than I trust a stranger. So if the conflict is with a grocery store worker, I'm going to try to de-escalate and control as much of it as I can on my end, because I don't know what their capabilities are. I don't know their skill level. I don't want to put the trust in them to help. Like, I don't want my ability to get through this conflict to rest on how much trust I have in their ability. Um, if it's someone close, like if Mike and I got into conflict, I knew without a doubt we both had the intention that the relationship was more important than the conflict. We both had the intention to work through the conflict. I knew he could be trusted to trust me. I knew we could talk it out. I knew that we didn't want, like, our goal was not to hurt each other. So with a person like that, I would be much more willing to kind of power share the responsibility for navigating the conflict. But in general, when there's a conflict started, I just assume that I'm the one with the more of the experience to get through it, and I try to take as much ownership of the conflict as I can. Even if I'm not, even if I know I'm not at fault, it's the other person. The other person may still not have the skill to get out of it. So I become aware of my affect. I evaluate the situation. I evaluate what I want to do with the relationship. I try to be. I tend to try to salvage relationships as much as possible, even if it's like a stranger at a doctor's office. You know, I may have to go back to the doctor's office. I want to keep good relations with them. Even if it's a person I may never see again, my default is to kind of try to preserve the relationship as much as I can. But if I have to burn a bridge to get out of conflict, I'll do it. I don't mind doing that. But I need to know that I'm prepared to burn that bridge. That's why that's easier to do with strangers or Twitter people even than with loved ones. So I always start with rational dialogue. And this is if you're working through the conflict with somebody else. There's intrapersonal things you could do, breathing, the cold water, whatever techniques you have to do. I kind of just sit there with the emotion because it doesn't bother me to be on fire. I mean, I'm a Satanist. I'm used to I've been through so many flames of hell. It doesn't bother me to sit there and be angry. Now, the other person might react to it. Like back home, they don't. Back home, if you and somebody from Louisiana is in a fight and you're both angry, nobody thinks that World War III is about to happen. They think, oh, it's two people angry and they're about to argue, and I hope it doesn't come to blows. But there's not this like increased threat level where everybody all of a sudden feels like they have to step in and quash the conflict. Sometimes you let people just talk or yell it out. But I know in like most American society, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest, that is not the norm. Like the first little hint of conflict, like the whole society mobilizes to neutralize it. I was watching a podcast today, and the girl on it was she was trans actually, but that's how well she passed, I guess, that I'm calling her a girl. But she kept accusing the host of raising his voice to being emotional. I'm like, he's not. He didn't raise his voice like even a millimeter as far as I'm concerned. So she was perceiving more conflict coming from him. And then she got emotional later and started ranting and raving way more than he ever was. So some of it was projection too. So the other person may perceive the conflict differently, I guess is the whole point. Um, you can't control that. And you won't really know. I don't know all the time how people are perceiving my conflict. I can tell you broadly along gender lines, I find that women, especially women not from the South or not working class, that are more middle class and maybe sheltered, experience conflict drastically differently than I do. Like anything could be conflict to them. If they ask you if you want a Coca-Cola, you say no the wrong way. That could be conflict. Like that could be set up their threat response. So I've kind of learned, and I'm really bad at this. This might be where the autism comes in. I've kind of learned to maybe notice different types or social demographics and kind of make guesses on how they might be experiencing the conflict. But I never really know, and I certainly wouldn't trust my read on the situation. So again, that's another reason why I try to take as much mastery of it as I can, because I am so bad at figuring out what's going on the other person's end. Um, If I feel like I've done something wrong, if I feel like the conflict was started because of me, not necessarily that it was not intentional, because if I'm doing something that I feel I'm completely justified in doing and it happens to lead to conflict, I'm not necessarily going to apologize. But if it's something that I feel like maybe I could have done a different way and it led to conflict because I didn't do it that way, I might apologize or at least acknowledge my part in the conflict to kind of help de-escalate. And I guess there's two paths. There's if you care about what happens with the relationship with the person in front of you, or if you don't care. If I don't care, I try to end it as quickly as possible. I'll either walk away. If it's like a system I'm interacting with, like a doctor's office or medical system, I'll just try to find somebody else as soon as like I'll give the person one or two tries to resolve it. If I see that it's going to escalate, I'll ask for a manager. Can we get a manager? Can we get a supervisor? Can we get somebody else here to help with the situation? Um, Usually that works. I mean, sometimes it turns out like The Color Purple, where Sophia and Miss Millie, and you have all the white people stand around you at some point, and the people that you think are coming in to help are not on your side. But generally, if you try to bring in a third party, I mean, it's a strategy. If it gets too overwhelming, if you bring in a third party and now you have two people screaming and yelling at you, just get the hell out of there at that point. So you always try to have an escape hatch where you could hit that button and parachute out when you need to. And that's a good strategy. That helps me a lot. Like I've been on Zooms where things have escalated and I'm like, I don't need to do this right now. Let me just take my moment and I'll exit this. I'll just hit leave and exit. And that keeps it from escalating. So I guess that's the point. Is it unless it's going to be this healthy, transformative conflict where because that can feel like escalation. I've had people tell me I was fighting and arguing when all I was doing was it was the conversation that happens as part of working through the conflict. I would remember in Vegas, I had a roommate from Alabama, and we had a friend over at the house from Michigan, and the three of us were talking and we were debating some random neutral topic, and me and the guy from Alabama, the other southerner, we started to get really passionate. That's another thing. Passion can be mistaken for conflict a lot of times, and it's not. So if y'all don't know passion or what passion feels like, please learn the difference and stop penalizing passionate people by making it seem like we're angry or aggressive or having conflict where we're just passionate. So he and I were passionately debating this topic, and it kind of appeared to what looked like escalation, but we knew it wasn't, that we were just getting worked up about our position on the topic. And the guy from Michigan at some point says, both of you stop fighting. And we looked at him at the same time and we both said, we're not fighting. And then we looked at each other and I said, did you think I was fighting? Did you think we were fighting? And he said, no. Did you think we were fighting? I didn't think we were fighting. And then we looked at him and said, see, we're not fighting. Neither one of us thought we were fighting. But to him, just that kind of like heated conversation looked like conflict to him. So a lot of times when you're trying to talk through or work through the conflict, that anger is going to show up in the voice. It's going to show up in the body language. Focus on the words. Focus on the conversation. Don't get thrown off by the affect or the deportment or the presentation of the person. That's because if you're in conflict, yeah, you probably are going to like. I'd say try not to yell and throw things. Of course, that's not going to. I would say that's healthy or transformative, or that it's going to de-escalate the situation. But if you're wanting to talk through it, there may be some elevated vocal pitch. There may be some intense facial emotions and hand gestures, perhaps. But don't let that throw you. If you think if we're on part 2 now, where the relationship is something that you care about and you don't want to damage through conflict. If you're going to try to talk through it, and remember, it depends on the skill level of the other person and your own skill level. But let's assuming you do have skills and the other person may or may not. If the other person, if you can't, if it's someone you care about, but you know that they don't have the ability to talk through the conflict in the moment, because I like to catch it when it's fresh. That's when I'm going to work through it the best. If I come back to it like a day later and try to work it out, I'm not going to have the same perspective on it. It's not going to have the same meaning. It's not going to be at the same like cognitive intensity in my brain where I'm able to access everything I want to say about it. There's going to be some of it's going to have faded or evaporated. Like some of the important things that I want to work through, I'll have less access to just memory wise because it's further removed from the event. So the more I can catch it when it's happening. That's why one of the things that pisses me off the most, it's a pet peeve of mine, if somebody has a problem with me and I find out about like 2 or 3 weeks later, and all this time they had a problem with me, but they weren't telling me. The minute you have a problem with me is the best time to tell me, when I can catch it while it's happening. So if you know the person doesn't have the skill or ability to work through it, you might want to do the timeout thing where you say, look, we're both angry right now. Let's come back to this where we've kind of cooled off and we had a clearer head about it. You can still talk through it. You can still work through it. You can still do the transformation thing. It just buys you like some emotional, like an emotional buffer and some cooling down to, and it's mainly for the other person. And this is the relationship you care about, remember. But if you can, if neither one of you are intimidated by the conflict or thrown off by it, and you're able to have a conversation even while the conflict is happening, I think that's the thing to do. I think this happens in debates a lot. I've started debating or gotten involved in the debate community on YouTube, and we debate on Discord and stuff like that. And people will have knockdown, drag out debates. They will get very heated about their position. They'll say horrible, awful things to the other person. They'll curse people out. They'll be very abrupt and kind of gruff in their responses. And to an outside observer, it must look like these people just really hate each other and are fighting. But I can tell you that that is a feature of the debate and the debate style. These people have an enormous amount of respect for each other. When the debate's over, they treat each other very well. You can see the admiration they have for each other. So conflict does not always look on the outside, to the outside, what it is on the inside. So while you're having this conversation, and it's getting heat. Now, one thing I don't do in conflict, I hold by my values. And usually I'm pretty good at becoming aware very early what value is in conflict, and also what my past history with this emotion or value is, because I can trace it back to, usually it's previous times where I've had similar conflicts with either the same person or different people around the same value. So I can kind of trace that historical track as well. And you're talking through it. I don't back down. I don't change my position. I don't compromise the value. I hold firm to whatever I know that I'm defending in the conflict, or whatever position I believe to be the valid one in the conflict. Now, I'm open to new information, which usually comes out through the dialogue. Another thing about conflict and strong emotion in general, and the affect of anger. I've talked in another video about that narrowing effect and how emotions tend to be more intense the smaller of a data set they're reacting to. So if your anger is locked in on one or two facts, and that's what it's directed toward, I do this intrapersonally myself, just even alone. I can start to bring in other perspectives and kind of get a wider, broader view of what the situation might actually be. But if you can do that through dialogue as well, if you can start opening up to the other person more of how you're seeing the event, and start to really listen and take in how they might be seeing it, anything you can do to widen your perspective on the situation is going to allow some room and space to kind of diffuse. It'll give that emotion more room to be directed outward at a wider kind of horizon than if it's locked in on, you did this thing to me, or you said this one thing and it pissed me off. There's a much broader context and story behind it always. And the more you can like cognitively start to tune into that and explore that and suss that out, the more room it's going to give that emotion to kind of spread and not be so like laser channeled. So through dialogue, you want to do stuff like that. One thing we learned from the ombuds is there's different goals in conflict depending on the two people, and it's kind of a spectrum. At one end, you have it's interest based. You're both focusing on the interest that you have in this conflict, and negotiation is at one end where you're going to try to get your interest or needs met, and hopefully at the same time find a way for the other person to get some or all of their interest or needs met. So negotiation is an interest based style of resolving conflict. And then you have at the extreme end, you have a power based where even if you're wrong, you want to win this conflict. You want to assert your dominance or mastery over this situation, regardless of your interest, regardless of right or wrong. In the middle, you have the legal approach, which is where you try to figure out who's right or wrong and assign responsibility for resolving the conflict along who is determined to be the more right in the conflict or the more wrong. So at the power end, you don't even care about who's right or wrong. Even if you're wrong, you want to win the conflict. So that's kind of an axis for different strategies for resolving conflict. But for today, just going with you're doing it with a loved one. If it's not a loved one, walk away, bring in a third party. Or sometimes walking away will burn the bridge, but this is a person you don't care about. So if you have to walk away and burn a bridge in the process, do that. If you have to get another person in, you can sometimes get somebody with more objectivity on the situation that can maybe help mediate or resolve it. If you bring third persons in and it just compounds the situation and adds more people to have conflict with, again, just try to exit as much as you can. And particularly if it's with a system, you can use advocacy, self-advocacy. There's a whole network of people that you can work your way through to resolve the conflict if it's a long-term conflict. So if you went to an appointment and got into it with the receptionist, walk away in that moment. You can always resolve the larger issue down the road. There's multiple avenues of advocacy. So just know that sometimes when you're locked in conflict, especially in the moment, it seems like that resolution's not possible or you don't see options or solutions in the moment. There are probably more out there than it appears in that instant. And that goes back to having that broader perspective as well. So with someone you do care about, walk away if you have to, especially if they're not at the same skill level for conflict resolution as you are. If you both are, try to talk it out. I'm not really good at suppressing the emotions. They're just natural. I kind of just let them flow through at some point. Usually once the rational dialogue starts, like not too far into it, especially once it looks like a solution is being approached, the affect will usually start to adjust on its own. And so it's usually temporary. It's the initial defense. A lot of it comes from defensiveness. Like Freud talks about the ego defenses. I probably should have touched on those today, but I don't think I'm gonna have time. I might have to do a whole topic on that. But a lot of it is ego. Like your ego is defending itself, and there's ego defenses being thrown up. But that's that initial defensiveness. Once you're tuned in to the relationship that you want to preserve and you start talking or working through it, a lot of that initial defensiveness will start to subside and the affect will start to shift a bit as you realize again that you're both working with each other's interest in mind. You're both wanting to come to a solution. You both care about the relationship. So however you can communicate that in the process will help toward a resolution. Get a mediator, get a third party. If you both want resolution, but neither one of you believes that you have the ability to pull it off right there, not that it can't be learned or developed later, but in that moment that you have the ability to pull it off, or that you don't rather, get help, get a mediator, get a third party, get a trusted friend, get a therapist, get a couples counselor, get somebody to help you work through the conflict if the goal is to preserve the relationship and not the initial whatever started the conflict in that moment. Conflicts almost always, I'm sure you've heard this over and over, it's almost always about something larger than what the initial conflict seems. It's not that your friend took a beer out of the refrigerator. It's something larger about the friendship itself and the values that the friendship is built around and that are being respected or honored or violated in some way. So either on your own if you can, but sometimes a third party can help bring in that more objective perspective that's needed to start to uncover those larger sources of the actual conflict. So there's stuff like that you can do. Third party, talk it out yourself, walk away, manage the emotional fallout from it, the emotional conflict. Now, what I really can't help with, because it's kind of so foreign to me, is the effect, the emotional effect that conflict can have on either the other party experiencing it or third party observers. It doesn't bother me to see people yell and scream at each other or even to fight sometimes. I know how humans are. I know it's part of the human experience. So conflict doesn't affect me in the way that it might affect other people. And I don't experience a lot of kind of side effects of my own from witnessing conflict. But if people do, like if you're one of the people that do, I imagine just the same emotional recovery techniques you would use for any emotion. Walk away, try to get a broader perspective on it. Really, I would say try to understand the conflict and maybe assume positive intent or more of a positive intent than might seem in the moment. Now, I have very little experience with this type of conflict that I'm about to describe, but if it's this type of conflict and you know it is, you're pretty sure it is, the type that's actual dangerous, like it will escalate, somebody will go grab a beer bottle and smash it on the person's head soon. If you know it's going to come to violence, like if it's the kind of conflict that's a precursor to violence, and again, 99% maybe. I'm trying to think. I had my nose broken outside of a gay bar once by a gay guy who was a friend of my ex that was really drunk and probably on cocaine. That's really the only violent conflict I've ever been in, and it wasn't even conflict. It was more he was doing it to me, and I was sitting there trying to talk and rationalize the whole time while he was pounding on my nose. But the whole thing, the point being that I don't ever expect conflict to end in violence, and I am pretty good at having it not end in violence. So I don't know how to identify the kind of conflict that's likely to end in violence. If that's the kind of conflict you have experience with and that you're worried about, I'm not going to tell you not to be worried about it or that it's not a legitimate concern. It's just not the kind of conflict I have experience with, either because the people that I have the conflict with, and here's another good point: I don't keep people in my life that I have a lot of unhealthy conflict to begin with. If I'm having conflict with somebody and it can't be resolved in a healthy way, that's probably not a person that I'm gonna have in my life long term. So I try to surround myself with people that do know how to manage conflict and can work through it when it happens. And that's another thing. If we're getting to know each other and kind of building trust, that initial trust, and I see that you can work through conflict when it happens, my trust level for you is going to go way up after that. So conflict doesn't necessarily turn me off of you as a person. Sometimes it's a like stepping stone to building an even deeper trust than was there before, just by virtue of the fact that I can see your ability to handle conflict, so that I know in the future, if there is conflict, this is somebody that I'm going to be able to work it out with. So I can feel more secure in the relationship. Um, so if it's the type, like the violent type, and then I mean, do what you have to do. Call the cops. I have no problem calling cops. In fact, I will, if I think something's going to escalate, I will usually either just call the cops, or, and I haven't had to do this hardly at all. I can't really think of a time off the top of my head, but I would either call the cops or let the person know, if this doesn't calm down, I'm going to call the cops. Whatever you have to do, if you suspect violence, whatever you have to do to keep yourself safe, keep other people safe, and de-escalate the situation, or bring in people with the expertise to de-escalate the situation. The kind of conflict I'm talking about today, when I titled this episode Conflict Management, was the more interpersonal kind that is not going to lead to violence, but it does have the ability to impact the relationship, and therefore there is a motive for resolving it or working through it somehow. So I want to make that point. This is definitely not advice for the violent conflict type, which again I do not have a lot of experience with. We are coming up on the hour. I am doing the edge piece of a new puzzle today, so I want to finish the edges real quick, and then I think I will wrap this up. If you have any questions about conflict, contact me. I don't mind talking about or helping out. I love helping people resolve conflict. It's one of my areas of interest and specialty. The email is primalhex, primalhex @gmail.com, or same name on Twitter. And don't forget, tomorrow, the panel at 11 a.m. Central on neurodivergence. And then after that, at 1 p.m. Central, my talk with Eric from Canada on mental health. And then we'll be back to having guests the rest of the week. If you want to come on and be a guest, we could talk about any mental, and this is for the month of May because it's mental health month, but we can talk about any mental health topic that you want. If you come on after May, we could talk about any topic you want. It doesn't even have to be mental health. I'm just trying to load this month up with mental health topics because it's that month. We get a whole month, so I want to take advantage of it. I guess I can finish this puzzle when I get off. So I guess that's what I have on conflict today, just from my own experiences, being in enough of them, and the little things I do to resolve them or get out of them. I have had conflict that got heated and intense that I didn't intend, and I didn't want the relationship to suffer, and I've kind of taken my calm down moments and de-escalate a bit and then come back to it, even as quick as 10 or 15 minutes later, and had the conversation go much more successfully. So that's why I said you kind of have to evaluate. Sometimes it's better to keep driving on in the moment while the conflict's raging, and sometimes it's better to take that breathing room. Just evaluate the person, yourself, the situation, the relationship. The whole goal is to give yourself the best advantage or chance that you can to make the resolution go in as positive a way as possible, which the assumption is that's the way you want it to go. You want it to go positive. If you don't, then you're kind of a freak, and we'll talk about those goals, I guess, at some other point. Just contact me. Okay. I think I'm just babbling at this point because I'm trying to finish the puzzle. I'll stop. See you tomorrow for the neurodivergence panel and the talk with Eric afterwards. Okay. Thanks for watching.